Hi, this is the painting with commentary track for the Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures Young Blue Dragon. I'm GMA Tank, and let's go over how I painted this and the color choices that I made. So here's the concept art. I always paint to try and make them as close to the Dungeon Master's Monster's Manual, I should say, as possible. So I'm using a techless blue as my base. These blues are the blues that I use are very primary in look when it's said and done, but blue dragons are the most primary looking of the dragons. I think they look the least realistic, whereas the other ones tend to be a little more dirty and rugged. The lore says that the sand blowing in the desert terrain where they live has polished their scales, so I'm okay with it. So we're using some techless blue on the spines and the body, the top and the bottom. You can see some liquid green stuff, that's those green patches on there. I had to fill in some seams when I first started with this mini, and that's what that is, just paint right over that. So underbelly is going to be a Fenrisian gray. So again, it's kind of hard to tell when you're not in the flesh, but I use multiple colors to try and blend it. So the Fenrisian gray underneath his belly, not on his scales. That's going to be ochre and camo, as we see here. But the inside, you can see in his crotch area there, the lighter blue on his underbelly versus the darker blue on his outer belly. And ochre and camo is kind of like a green yellow color. I felt it matched nicely with the art in the Monster's Manual, and I'm of course going to put a wash over that later as well. So we're touching this up again. Anywhere where there's an underbelly scale, it's going to get the same treatment of the ochre and camo. And I love watching people paint these things all kinds of different colors, and yet because I've sort of staying true to the Monster's Manual, I'm kind of restricted in what I can do, but to each their own. And once we tidy up these scales here and get that painted all on there, we're going to switch to the wings. So I'm also using ochre and camo for the wing membrane, but I'm going to dilute it with a little bit of Lamian medium right there. So all that does is, I mean, you can use water. I don't know, I find when I use the Lamian medium, it's almost like an oily texture. I just find it makes it really smooth and puts it on nicely without drying cloudy. So I'm going to apply this to every wing membrane, being as gentle as possible not to hit the spines, so I don't have to do any touch up later, or as little as possible. So just take your time and a lot of paint, let it pool and cover up any of the blues that you've maybe hit from before. And conceptually, you know, these things will blend in kind of camouflage with the sand and the sky, whether they're flying high or if they're in the sand. These kind of yellow greens will help them with camouflage. Of course, the blue, maybe an oasis, I don't know. So once I put a nice coat of this on there, we're going to come back and we're going to do the top side of this dragon. It's already dried with techless blue. You can see the Fenrisian gray on his feet there, and in his underside, the two-tone effect instead of being all one blue. And next we're going to do a contrast paint on his back side. The top of him is going to be darker blue than the below. So we're going to see what that one is next as I just finish off this little bit of wing here for this video. So Talisar blue, it's extremely rich and very rich. It looks super dark, and it is. You know, be careful you don't cover up too much of your undercoat, that Fenrisian gray. But on the outside of his body, I am putting on this contrast paint. And as Duncan in Games Workshop said, you know, paint it and then move on. Make sure you sop up any puddles, but don't touch on parts you've already painted because it's already drying and you'll leave little weird lines and rivets if you touch it. So paint it and move on, let it dry and do its thing. Afterwards, if there's any pools you missed, then you can touch them up later with the under paint on top. And that's what I've done here with the contrast paint. It's already starting to dry. You can see it's much nicer and dark. So back to techless blue, because he has these scales. I didn't want to paint the arm scales, the ochre and camo, because they're part of his arm and not his underbelly. But you can see he's got these little arm scales. They're very defined, so I wanted to paint them back to the color of the blue before I put that contrast paint on there, so that's what I did there. Ushabti Ushabti, nice, bone. This is the color I chose for all of his teeth, horns, and yada yada. So apparently they're, and I found this out afterwards in my video making, but those chin horns should be blue. I thought they looked like more hornlets and teeth, so I painted them all to look kind of bone color. But if I was to truly stay true, I should have left those chin horns blue, but I don't think that matters in the end. Everyone can paint their dragon a little differently. So don't forget his cool doomsday looking bone nodules sticking out of his elbows. That's a Superman reference from the comics. So out it comes. Those are nasty looking things. Anywhere where there's horn, we're going to paint them. The fang, it's a base color from Citadel. I'm using that for all his claws. This is very navy looking blue. I didn't want to go with dark like black or brown. I want to keep it all blue. So all of his claws are going to be blue. One thing too with the horn, the Ushabti horn, bone color that I was using, I thought his all the way up his back would have those horns, but they don't. Just the face and the elbows. So that's it. So we're just finishing up with the fang on his winglets. Now Imric blue is the first of 3 colors I'm going to dry brush on his back. Because that Talisari contrast is so dark, a little bit of Imric dry brushed on there to kind of bring back some of those scales. As you can see, it takes away the monotony of the solid dark blue contrast. And that's what I was kind of trying to do there. And on the fronts, anywhere where it's kind of fronting in the light, his ears, his face, just a nice dry brush just to kind of pop some of those details. And then we're going to use a Cronus blue, which is a lighter blue than Imric. That's next. I'm not going to apply it as much and in as many places, but I am going to apply it just to try and kind of create a gradient. Oh, it was a little heavy on that side, Mike. Oops. Yeah, take your time, but we don't have mistakes, we just have happy accidents. And sometimes just go with it, and what you're left with is a learning process, and don't fret the small stuff. If you constantly see, I'm putting some on the fang horns to make them so they're not just solid blue, that they have a little bit of like texture to them. And then next we're going to go with a Praxetti white. I see the tip of his horn, and on the tip of those scales a little bit of white. I did not like this when it was done, and I think I hit it with another blue afterwards to get rid of it, because sometimes that'll happen. You'll look at it and you'll go, dang, it's not really what I was aiming for, but that's okay. Just either fix it or don't. It's not going to be the end of the world, and you're going to be the only one who notices it. Agrax Earthshade on any of the exposed bone. That's his horn and the hornlets and his teeth. Agrax Earthshade as opposed to Nuln because it's got a brown undertone, and I don't want black anywhere on this. I wanted to keep it in the earthy, that Ogren camo with the Agrax Earthshade and the blues, a little bit bone. So he has these double lines of scales, and we have the Ogren camo underneath and the Talisar blue on top, but there's this one little jut of scale there. I decided to paint the bone color just like the horns on his face, to break it up, and I think that worked really well when everything was said and done. And that's that little line of horns or scales there. So Agrax Earthshade on the wings now to bring it a little less solid yellowy looking. Now one thing with this, because the picture had like a mottled effect on it, I didn't want to put too much. I did want it to stay nice and primary, but I didn't put too much on. I take one brush full and I kind of spread it everywhere, and then I use my brush in a tapping motion to try and get whatever excess is on there to pool in spots instead of looking like lines. I want it to look spotty, so I'll show you in a second. So this is Raelyn Flesh Shade. It's also a shade on his belly. Why not Agrax Earthshade? I don't know. It's a little more red than the brown of the Earthshade, and since this is already kind of a green, I thought that would look cool, and it works out. It's a little different. Didn't want it to look too much of the same. But when you look at the finished picture, his wings do have kind of a spotted mottle effect, and that's because how I applied the Agrax Earthshade. Once it was on there, I dotted. So phalanx yellow for his eyes. It's a shitty quality shot there, but Okay, I used a ushab, whatever, bone for the base. I had a cooler idea for this base. It didn't work out, so what we're about to see is what I finished with. Some tasty white glue on the bone. Spread it around nice and thin. Use some fine white stone granules from Michael's or your craft store. And there we go. So these are wild grass tufts from War World Scenics. In the UK, you can see them on there. And I see that big lump of wood. That's actually called a gouty. That's actually, see that picture there? That's what a wasp does. There's a species of wasp that it bites an oak tree, it lays its larvae in there, and the tree makes an immuno response. It turns into that big, look like a callus, and then the larvae emerge from it. They burrow out. It's kind of cool. And my sister's farm has some of those trees with those, so I snipped some off and took them for basing. So here's the finished dragon. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. You can see here, there's the thick boy. Now, a couple notes. I did not use his lightning breath because I thought it was a little too big. It was almost the entire size of his body. So imagine he's in the center of that base, yet he'd have this lightning breath sticking out like 2 inches off the base. So it's not that I couldn't paint it or didn't want to paint it. It was just too big, too much. So that's why I didn't use it. And you know, those breath appendages, just like the beholder, you don't have to use them if you don't want. None of the other dragons I've painted so far have any type of breath, except the red is coming up. I may or may not use it, depends on how that settles. So, as I was saying, if you have any questions, please leave me feedback in the comments below, and I will return your answers. By no means am I the best painter out there. You guys have a lot of experience yourselves, I'm sure. But I do like to try and help, and I do like to share my experience with everyone who wants to watch. So I hope you had a good time watching this video and the episode about Raelyn the Yellow Dragon, because he's a chicken shit. Bark. This is GMA Tank signing off. Hope you have a good week. Talk to you later.